Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 23rd of March, comes to you from London. And the big news so far this morning is this move in gold. Excuse me. We're seeing gold prices down over 5%, and we had a very big move on Friday. So we are seeing a real sell-off there. And if we look at the 60-minute chart, we can see really once we broke this level and we were below the cloud and we had downside targets, that the prices just fell away. So gold finding support at previous level of 4,100 this morning, but it's in free fall. And it's going to be a case of waiting to see on the shorter term charts new upside targets coming into play. Of course, we're seeing a similar picture on silver. Did actually slightly hold the low here, although we just broke it temporarily. And if we look at the 60-minute chart, and the downside targets are there, if we look at the 60-minute chart, those downside targets are all being met. So that is bearish. A lot of people will wonder why this is happening. Anyone who's been margin called on other assets is probably looking to sell and liquidate some positions. And if they're sitting on very good profits, then that's what's happening. But downside targets still lower for silver. So platinum's down nearly 7%. So we're seeing similar picture there to the downside target below the cloud now there on the daily. And the same here for palladium heading towards the target. So key thing is we are just finding support on the lagging line, the daily, on gold, silver. We are also just finding support on the lagging line. So it's a real test here, but platinum and palladium are already through, so they're looking quite bearish. Of course, everything that's going on in the Middle East, it's all eyes on crude oil. We're seeing Brent crude up this morning. We've got upside targets there, and interesting, the 1 minute chart, if you're trading crude oil, this is the one you'd want to watch. That has just activated a new upside target to 126. So a break of 120 will be highly significant for crude oil. And we're seeing gas prices up. The whole energy mix is rising on what's going on in the Middle East. Looking at bond yields, really significant here. Well, first of all, the dollar has been a level of strength we see there in the medium term chart, but the short term chart has been, that's the long term. If we look at the short term chart, we see here the dollar has actually had that run and then rising. So we're just waiting to see if we can activate above 150, 100.5. But at the moment, currencies are relatively sanguine. But if we look at bond yields, this has been the area of concern. We're seeing Japan starting to nudge that high again, the most indebted nation in the world, seeing big moves in the US, big upside target there, 11% higher. US debt obviously a worry globally. UK has steadied this morning, but we've got a big upside target there for bond yields. And countries like Germany, we're seeing multiple upside targets, and the same for Italy and Australia. That's really moving higher already. So we talked about that before. But this is the big fear, the inflationary pressures, which then leads to global markets, equity markets falling away. So if we look, we're seeing the S&P now below the cloud. It's below the 200-day moving average. The NASDAQ talked about that downside target being activated. That can only be negated with a move above the thrust level, which is a new high. If you look at the Dow, it's obviously a tighter shortly held index, still below the cloud there. The DAX in Germany down this morning, down over 2%, and breaking to 6-month lows. 7 or 8 month lows. So that's really significant. UK market down 1.4% this morning on the future. So that target, we're starting to really discount that now. And if you go to the shorter term chart, you can see we've got downside targets. This is a case of how much pain do you want to live with, really. Long-term investors will take a bigger view than short-term. Now, I don't have prices yet for the UK market, but to be honest, at the market open, they're going to be really volatile anyway. But if we look at what's going on in the bellwethers, we start with the Dow. Well, in fact, just let's look at what was going on in other markets. We saw Japan stocks further down, downside target, so 10% lower there potentially. Hang Seng down 3.5%, just hitting the target that was already given. And if we look at the Shanghai, that's also just breaking all these markets now below the cloud. Sensex in India has been in free fall, and the Aussie market down 0.7%. A lot of gold stocks there, of course, falling. So that's really quite key. But looking at the bellwethers, well, first of all, look at the tech. Apple, a lot of these stocks now, they're looking at the medium-term chart for Apple. We had upside targets. Some of them met, but now we've got a lower high watching for a lower low, which would activate the downside target. Amazon, again, starting to, and a lot of these charts looking quite messy. There's Google. This was the star, if you like, but they've given a downside target. Lagging line not yet through the cloud, but it would be quite something if that broke. Microsoft has really been an underperformer over the last several months, and if we look at the 60-minute chart, every time we have selling thrusts that generate new downside targets. Now, Nvidia is the one we watch a lot. Downside target given on the 60-minute chart on the 26th of February. That was post results to 165. We break that level of 170. We've got a new downside target for Nvidia given on Friday, so that's really significant. And then if we look at Tesla, also downside targets. There's actually 3 targets sitting in there. They're obscured, so you can quite see that multiple downside targets. Train tracks is something we worry about as well. Looking at the Dow, we can see a lot of stocks were down in the Dow. There's a handful of stocks up on Friday. Verizon, that's looking strong in a weak market. So that's and got a good upside target. That's the daily chart. Visa, a lot of the financials had been hit with downside targets there and below the cloud. So that's a very different picture from Verizon. And Goldman's having just had an upside target, then a lower high, lower low, and downside, and now below the cloud. So we'd start to discount these targets. Of course, the standout is Chevron, and they've hit that upside target that was given at 165 to above 200. That was given in January, and that's been met. That target given well ahead of actually war breaking out. So that's really significant. So it's going to be very interesting today. But we are at a point where markets are turning. And for investors generally, you've got to decide how much downside you want to live with. Look at your downside targets and your cloud position. Until tomorrow, happy charting. Bye for now.